Hello and welcome, for it is time for another episode of Bonus. For the gameplay this week, I have some Monkey Island 2, LeChuck's Revenge for you, which is a classic adventure game from LucasArts, and certainly a personal favourite of mine. As you might be able to guess, I have been working on the Brief History of Piracy video, which is a leviathan. I think this one might be a good solid 20 minutes long, so I've got a whole host of games to record, so I've been awfully busy the last week or so, mostly spent trying to get stuff to run. There's a bit of a recording void when it comes to video games. Like anything that runs on an old system, you can emulate. Anything that runs in DOS, you can run in DOSBox. But the early Windows stuff, before 3D acceleration, is a right royal pain, I'll tell you that much. I'm getting slightly tempted to set up a virtual machine running Windows 95, but for the sake of a couple of games, I'm not sure if it's worth it. Anyway, the script is coming together and my recordings are slowly taking shape. I've written about 2,500 words, which doesn't sound like a lot, but the research behind it is quite lengthy. It takes a while. So a Brief History of Piracy, probably about a week away. Hard to say exactly when, but I don't want to rush it. Anyway, let's get to those questions. Michael No says, do you like your neighbours? Yeah, for the most part. I think we've been quite lucky, neighbour-wise. On our left side, we've got a slightly older couple who are very, they keep to themselves, they're very friendly. And the ones on the right, they're a little bit more raucous. There's a large family. I think there's 3 generations under one roof. But yeah, I think for the most part, we've got a good relationship with them as well. No major feuds anyway, which is probably helped by the fact that we don't have a car in our household, because I understand there have been some arguments in the past on our street regarding parking positions. Such is the world of banal suburban living. Joe Graves says, do you fancy an Android phone or an Apple phone, Stu? People lean towards Android because they want expandable storage and a bigger screen. I'm one of those individuals. Apple does have a good rep, and they are launching a much larger screen in the 4th quarter of 2014. At the moment, I'm more of an Android guy. My current phone isn't particularly impressive. It's a Sony Xperia Play, which is really good for emulation, but not much good for anything else. It is due for replacement, so I'm thinking of getting a Nexus 5 at some point. I've also got a Nexus 7 tablet, which I take with me on my travels sometimes. It's a nice form factor, it's good for the second screen stuff on the Xbox and PlayStation. I can check my achievements and what have you. And it's pretty well spec'd as well. It's a nice device that comes in at a nice price. I think that's probably the main thing I like about Android, is you do get more choice when it comes to handsets, and you don't have to spend quite as much money. Andrew Harvey says, Black Ops 2 was in the 80s, how did you like it? Well, I liked Black Ops 2, but it's fair to say that it didn't really embrace the 1980s aesthetic. It's one thing to take place in the 80s, it's another thing to be styled after the 80s. Geeky Nerd for the Win says, in the Brief History of and other series that provide multiple different games, is that your gameplay? Because it seems like it would cost a lot of time and money to get all the games. Well, you're not wrong, it does take a lot of time and effort. Some videos are better than others. For instance, Iconic Arms needs about maybe 10-15 different games, and it doesn't have to be anything specific, so I can go for the lowest hanging fruit. Stuff like the Brief History tends to place more specific demands on me. Obviously, I can't talk about piracy without including the Monkey Island games. Luckily enough, I already own most of them, and while I do have to buy a couple of games, I'm normally okay. When it comes to older games or arcade games, I'll generally go to emulation for those, so I will source ROMs, which from a moral standpoint is questionable, but it's for the video, isn't it? For newer games, I do tend to buy it. I look out for decent deals on Steam or other digital distribution, but quite often I find you can get like Xbox 360 or PS3 games really, really cheap used. Like if it's not particularly rare and it came out in 2007, you can probably get it for a couple of quid. And, I don't mind enhancing my collection because it might help for a future video. So yeah, videos that have a lot of breadth, that demand a lot of specific titles, can be a pain. This is sometimes why videos like that can take a little while to produce, and it's why I don't do them too often. Timothy Bucklin says, if Activision offered you a contract to do advanced warfare weapon guides over a 4 to 6 month period, would you take it? If the money was good enough, sure, I'd take it. I'm not too proud to turn down well-paid work. A 4 to 6 month break on my channel might hurt my momentum a little bit, but given that I don't have a huge amount of momentum as it is, it probably wouldn't be that harmful. Anyway, in the meantime, I should probably focus on my channel and try and find some momentum. Liam Durr says, Dear Stu, what is the worst kind of beer and or alcohol you have ever had? The one thing that springs to mind is very probably Buckfast. I had a bottle for an episode of Beverage Guide Express. It's a fortified red wine. It's very, very high in alcohol. It's very sickly sweet as well, and it's just all round not something you'd really want to drink. Apart from that, I remember having a particularly bad bottle of wine once. I think it was a bottle called Rorke's Drift. It was a cheap bottle that a friend bought, and it just tasted of cheese. Like, you drink it and you think, oh good god, that tastes of cheese. Not even nice cheese, it was just horrible, nasty stuff, like sweaty feet cheese. Salim B says, what happened to your website? My server died, is what happened to it. It's been down for a few weeks now. But yes, I actually rented my own server, and unfortunately it had a hardware failure, which meant that it needed my intervention to fix it and to set everything back up again, and I've just been too busy to do it. I have got some hosting sorted again though, and I'll probably stick something up there pretty soon. Nothing too exciting, probably just be a single page, with a link to my channel and contact information, that sort of thing. Next, it's a long one from Boise Gang Gaming. Says, hey Stu, several questions. What other brief history of videos do you have planned? A brief history of powered exoskeletons would be a nice thing to do about Halo the Master Chief Collection and Call of Duty Advanced Warfare come out. I don't know about exoskeletons, that might be a little bit specific. What do I have planned though for the series? I'm thinking after a brief history of piracy, I'd quite like to do a brief history of graphics. I'd quite like to talk about, the developments in the hardware and the technology behind video game graphics. So start off talking about raster versus vector, then talk about, games that break certain thresholds, like the first 3D game, the first game to use RGB raster display, which I think was Galaxians, the first game to use an isometric display, which I think was Zaxxon, so on and so forth, there's plenty of stuff to talk about graphics. I could probably pick out an interesting 15-20 minutes. Of course, Crysis would make an appearance, amongst a few other games best known for their graphics. Beyond that, I'd quite like to do some genre-specific videos, like a brief history of driving games, and I suppose the inevitable brief history of FPS. And I suppose if the pirate video does well, then I might be tempted to do more thematic histories like Cyberpunk. A brief history of Cyberpunk I think could be pretty interesting. All Deus Ex and System Shock and I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, that sort of thing. Second question, could you do iconic video game arms such as the Lancer from Gears of War, the MA5 series assault rifles from Halo, or the Scar from Crysis? Could be a nice little spin-off, and you wouldn't have to buy as many games. It's a possibility. I'm not sure if it would fit the iconic arms format, because the idea behind that is to expound on the cultural impact of a particular firearm. But I could maybe trial a special, I think the Lancer from Gears of War is pretty iconic in and of itself, but I'm not sure if a fictional weapon would have the same appeal. So it's something I might try, it's something I might pilot at some point. Number 3, what are your opinions on where video games are headed? Personally, while I like the futuristic and modern day settings, I would like to see an FPS set in the Cold War, with politics, backstabbing and proxy wars. Where are video games headed? I'm not sure they're headed anywhere, they're just kind of wandering around like a headless chicken trying to find something that's going to be hugely popular next. Seems to be sci-fi, doesn't it? I mean, Titanfall's sci-fi, Destiny's sci-fi, Halo is sci-fi, but sci-fi is one of those things that's been around for a while. So as far as, realistic games, I don't know, maybe the trend of realistic combat has come to an end. Maybe, like the era of World War II games, maybe the era of modern military shooters is coming to a close, maybe. As for my preference, I like my games to be stylish and bold, but it's not really specific to any particular time frame. I think you can make an interesting, good game from any time period, really. And finally, you said it would be interesting to see a COD set in the 80s, but what would the plot be like? Taking down crime lords? Honestly, I feel that would get old really fast, but that's just me. Multiplayer would be interesting though. Well, the 80s wasn't really about plot, was it? It was about doing jumps off ramps and explosions. I think as long as you get those in, you'll be fine. I guess if you want to sort of, take the 80s trope to the maximum, you probably want to have a kingpin, don't you? You want to have a big fat cat boss, and then a number of henchmen that you have to defeat on the way to the boss. A little bit like Crackdown, now that I think about it. Xbox Zeke78 says, hey Stu, what do you think of France? The food, the monuments, the wine? I'm not so sure about France the country. I've been through a couple of times. I've never stayed in France, now that I come to think of it. I've been to Paris though. I've seen the Eiffel Tower. I've done the usual touristy stuff. But I've never stayed in France. But that's actually about to change. I have a wedding. One of my French friends is getting married this summer, and I've been invited somewhere just outside Paris, I think. So that should be nice. French food, of course. I mean, French food and English food, actually, there's considerable influence between those two. I mean, a lot of English cordon bleu cooking is directly inspired by French stuff, and vice versa even. I think the Southwest's love of cider comes from the French. I think the drink originates in Brittany as kind of a farmhouse brew. And it obviously spread because we grew apples as well. I quite like French video games as well, come to think of it. You've got companies like Delphine and Infogrames. They've done some pretty good ones, like Cruise for a Corpse, I think was French, I think. You've got Flashback, you've got Another World. Infogrames did Alone in the Dark. So you've got some really classic video games that come from France. In fact, a brief history of French games I think could be really interesting. Of course, these days it's all Ubisoft, but, I mean, I have to be honest, as far as French-speaking countries go, I do prefer Belgium, but only for their beer brewing prowess. But I must concede, I like France more than is usually permitted within English culture. England and France have got a long history. I mean, we've fought many, many wars, but the thing is, our people are kind of similar. We're kind of the same sort of, we have a similar origin. I think the blame for that can be squarely put at the feet of the Normans in the 11th century who came over and installed the feudal system. I think in many respects, England and France are like two brothers. We don't always get on, sometimes we fight, but we're of a similar stock. Tarek Pro says, I'm asking this for the 10th time. Did you ever play Stronghold Crusader or any Stronghold games? Are you looking forward to Stronghold Crusader 2? No. Sorry, that was rude. No, I haven't played any of them. I do like strategy games, so I probably should try them at some point. It's just the opportunity has yet to present itself. David Alejandro Sanesios Leal says, do you ever think gaming would be considered an art? The making, not the playing. Hideo Kojima addressed the heavily implied sexual assault, along other themes, in Metal Gear Solid 5 Ground Zeroes, explaining that video games will never be considered a serious deal until they manage to be on the same level as cinema regarding the themes they tackle and the presentation they have. Do you think this is true? Is the rape in Metal Gear Solid 5 justified? To answer the first question, video games are already considered art. Not everybody agrees, but as long as some people consider it an art, then, well, surely that's good enough, right? Anyway, with regards to covering sensitive topics in games, I think a content creator should have the right to produce whatever they like. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean they'll be free to sell it. That doesn't necessarily mean they won't be subject to censorship by a ratings board or a government or whatever. But I think a creator has a certain right to explore whatever they like in their own work. There's going to be some stuff in fiction that evokes a negative reaction, and that's alright, not everything has to be completely inoffensive. Of course, this doesn't mean that it's invulnerable to criticism, and I do think the game can be criticised for its coverage of themes, particularly if it does it in a sort of a pruritic, a lascivious, or otherwise indulgent or unpleasant way. But even in the face of condemnation from the critics, that doesn't mean that the game has any less right to exist. And to suggest otherwise is just censorship, which is, I mean, you can support censorship if you like, but I won't agree with you. Imran Kibria says, hey Stu, seeing as the vote for Scottish independence is coming up soon, do you think Scotland should go independent? I think Scotland should make the decision. There are pros and cons for each side of the argument, and personally, I don't know, part of me would like to see Scotland go independent, but only on the proviso that I get a Scottish passport, because both my parents are Scottish, you see. So I've got a lineage and a heritage that goes up to Scotland, so I'd hate to lose that just by living in England. I can't see myself moving to Scotland anytime soon, but at some point, maybe when I retire, maybe living in Scotland, I'd like that to be an option for me, anyway. The NL23 says, Stu, have you played the Brothers in Arms series? If so, what did you think of it? I've only played one, I think. I've played Brothers in Arms Hell's Highway, which was set during Operation Market Garden in the Netherlands. It was pretty good, if I remember correctly. It's been a while since I played it. I remember there being a lot of windmills. Otherwise, it was a fairly well-accomplished World War II FPS. James Burton says, hey Stuart, will streaming be in your near future, as streaming is the thing these days? Also, I have not long received my deactivated British Lanchester 9mm SMG. Not sure where to put it in my house. Where is it in yours? As every ornament needs a place to be. Should I be ashamed that I sometimes pick it up and pretend to be an army guy? No shame, that's half the reason I own mine. I think my collection of deactivated arms are currently hidden away. We had some, well, I think it was when I had my internet installed. I had some engineers come into my office, and I didn't want there to be, just like guns casually spread around, so I put them in a cupboard. That is one thing to be mindful of. You don't want people looking through your windows and seeing you've got guns on the wall and calling the police. The last thing you want is a no-knock raid at 6 AM. Anyway, as far as streaming is concerned, I can't promise to be a regular streamer. I just can't. I don't keep a regular schedule. I don't sleep on a 24-hour routine. So it's going to be sort of as and when I can stream. I will probably stream for quite a long time when I do. You can probably expect to see me for at least 4 hours. I'm not going to do it in dribs and drabs. It'll be nice meaty sessions, but regular is going to be the last word I'd use to describe it. For a number of reasons. Like I say, I'm not always awake at the right times, and I prefer to do it when the wife is away. Like when she's at work or, otherwise away at home or something. Because I cannot stand being interrupted, and knowing her, she'd probably come upstairs and be like, "Stuart!" And I'd be all like, "I'm streaming, dear," and then, it'd be awfully embarrassing for all concerned. So anyway, what I'll probably do is I'll stream new games that I get, probably as close to release day as I can muster. So I might play, there's new Titanfall DLC coming, so I'll probably, I'll get back on for that, I'll play some of those maps. And any other new releases on the Xbox One. I should really set up my PS4, I need to get the PlayStation camera though, to have, the old picture-in-picture to do it properly. Daredevil Zombie says, will you do a Weapons of Halo or a Weapons of Counter-Strike? And are there any Russian or Slavic beverages that you like? Russian or Slavic beverages? Well, the vodka's not bad. Probably my favourite Slavic beverage, Slivovitz, which is it's a plum brandy sort of thing, it's quite a nice liqueur anyway. As far as the Weapons of Halo, you can probably expect a special episode for the release of the Master Chief Collection. I think that'd be quite nice to sort of go over some of the history of the Halo weapons. As far as Counter-Strike's concerned, I don't have anything specific planned, but you can expect to see lots of Counter-Strike in the iconic ARMS series. Zymaru says, Stu, somewhat of a serious question here from a cat owner. How do you feel about pet insurance? I recently lost my cat unexpectedly. Taking her to the vet cost over $1,000 in one day, and she still died. Do you think pet insurance is a good idea? I have one other cat, and I wonder if I should insure her to avoid a high bill like this in the future, if it ever comes. Yeah, I do think pet insurance is probably a good idea for those who might not be able to afford a very large vet bill. Whether it's worth it over the lifetime of the animal, I don't know. I mean, obviously the insurance companies have to make a profit, so you might very well pay out more on insurance than if you didn't have insurance and just paid for the stuff you needed. But I suppose it's kind of a gamble, isn't it? We don't have pet insurance, but generally speaking, paying for stuff isn't too much of an issue. I mean, one of ours, Ted, he had major hip surgery a couple of years ago, and that came to, I think it was about £1,400, which is obviously a large chunk out of pocket. But apart from that, it's generally just, stuff like vaccinations and the occasional checkup or round of antibiotics. I suppose it sounds callous, but when it comes to major stuff, I guess you've got to kind of have a cut-off. Certainly if a cat's older. If you've got a 15-year-old cat that's facing, surgery that could cost thousands of pounds, maybe you've got to think, well, what are the palliative options? The trick is trying to remain rational when, a pet of yours is in distress. Spare7x says, how much do you actually like answering a bunch of questions every week? Do you get too many questions, wishing you could answer them all? Or are there never enough questions to choose from? I don't mind recording the bonus. Certainly once I get going, everything sort of, comes naturally. There's a bit of inertia. I don't like starting recording because I've got to get my head in the game. I've got to start, making sure my voice is clear and all that. But yeah, once I'm going, it's generally pretty... it's just me talking. There's not much to it. As far as the number of questions is concerned, there's never really a shortage. There's enough curious people out there, I suppose. And if I ever did run dry, I'd just shorten the length of bonus. Or I'd just talk for 20 minutes about something really self-indulgent. Maybe I could talk about, my video work or crush or something like that. I can go on. I certainly don't lose any sleep about not answering questions, Principally because I know that, there are so many questions from you guys, I could never answer them all. D. Baston says, Hi, after visiting Preston a fortnight ago, I was wondering what your opinion on Preston Bus Station is. Love it or hate it? Ah, the bus station. It was built in an era of brutalism. It's made out of concrete, and it's just this sort of big, blocky thing. It's kind of got fluted tiers on the car park, so they kind of come up in sweeping curves. But it's otherwise very blocky, very square, and well, some might say ugly. But I like it. Even though it's ugly, I like it. It has a sort of simplicity to it. The beauty of it as well, and it's a solidly made building, you know? I'll do you a favour, I'll show you a picture from Wikipedia. There it is. Preston Bus Station. It's beautiful. It's like a wonderful concrete flower. Alright, anyway, we've hit 20 minutes, so I shall wrap this up. Thank you very much for your questions, and thank you in advance for your questions for next week's video. As I mentioned, I'm working on a brief history of piracy. It's a lot of work, and I'd be lying if I said it was less than a week away. So hopefully by next bonus, I'll have some good news and say, it's finished, and then I'll release it on Friday or something. But I'm not going to rush it or anything, because I do want it to be a good video. So that does, of course, mean there'll be no video on my main channel this week, which I generally don't like doing. I don't like missing a week. But for the sake of a longer video, hopefully it'll be pretty special. We'll see. Anyway, thank you for watching. Until next time, farewell.